welcome to part 6 in our series on screenwriting with Karel Seegers. Hello, Karel.
Hello, Phil.
Now, we've talked a lot about character. Screenplay, as far as I'm concerned anyway, is structure. So, and there's a common 3-act structure that most people talk about. What is that exactly?
Well, I wish more people were convinced of it the way you are. But yeah, some people have said structure is everything, and I think it is very important. It's got to do with, you know, the other day we were talking about how actions need to be laid out in a meaningful way. Well, structure does that, and the 3-act structure is the oldest form that does that. You have it in any type of story, whether it's a fairy tale or a play or a movie screenplay. In movies, because movies play out in time and they have a fixed time, it's even more important you get it right.
Now, put it simply, we're just talking about beginning, middle, end.
Well,
yeah?
you know, Aristotle said that. Aristotle, 3,000 years ago said you have a beginning, you know. But interestingly, his beginning was not at the beginning. He had a prologue.
Right.
Prologue, and at the beginning was what we would call the inciting incident or the call to adventure. And that's really where the story starts. And if you're aware of that, then you know that whatever happens before that, you know, the audience is waiting. They're waiting for the story to start, right? So that, in our thinking, that's all first act. And it was Sid Field in 1979 who published Screenplay, you know, the book, with his paradigm. And he did a lot of great work, but as we progressed and learned more about screenwriting, I think the book's done more damage than anything else.
Why do you think that?
Well, because it's very rudimentary. It's very, very basic.
Oh, you could argue, well, people have built upon that. That was the foundation.
Yeah.
If you go only from that,
yeah.
it's like it's very limiting nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't write a screenplay. I don't believe you can write a successful screenplay today just following Sid Field. The basic 3-act structure, I mean, again, it goes with goals. Goals drive that. People ask, sometimes, this is funny, right? Sometimes people say, well, the goal must be established before the end of Act 1. I said, well, that's like asking someone, it's like, drop this mug and make sure we hear the sound right after it touches the floor. I know it doesn't make sense because the sound is when it touches the floor.
Now, when they say just before the end of Act 1, there is, in this 3-act structure, you've mentioned the inciting incident, the thing that happens right up front that gets the story rolling,
yes,
gets the ball rolling.
Yep.
Then at the end of Act 1, there's usually a turning point of some kind, just before the end.
That's right.
Which should pretty much define the hero's goal. This is the argument there.
Yeah, well, we need to see, as a result of that, we need to see action again. We need to see the character do something from which we understand, now he's on the goal.
Or
he's
now at least we know what the challenge is for him.
Yeah, that's right.
Whether he takes that call to adventure or not.
That's right. So the goal is established. The goal is established, the hero is aware of the goal, the audience is aware of the goal. Tick, Act 1. Right. That's how it works.
There's our beginning. Yeah. We've set things up. That's our setup.
So in other words, you cannot have the goal established before the end of Act 1. In the same way, you cannot have the sound here, you know, before the mug hits the ground.
Yes.
Because it's defined by the goal.
Yes.
Once the goal is established, end of Act 1. Now the end of Act 2 is a little bit more difficult. A lot of people struggle with it. I've struggled with it.
No, I've heard them define it, you know, we said beginning, middle, end. There's also setup, confrontation, resolution.
Well, every scene works like that. Every sequence works like that. So it becomes problematic because, you know, you can see everything as complication or development or conflict. The resolution is in the 3rd act. But where is the end of Act 2? It's difficult, you know. Some people say it's the lowest point, and it is in most films. It is the lowest point.
It can be, yes.
But then you need to come out of that lowest point as well. And the lowest point often relates to the inner journey, what we call the inner journey, which is related to the theme. So you've got 2 journeys, right? We've got the outer journey, which is what the character does, what we see, you know, the sheriff trying to stop the shark. The inner journey is the character change, is the character overcoming that weakness of lack of responsibility in the
So despite the fact that we've said it has to be revealed through action, visible action, because it's cinema after all, there is still an inner journey that character must follow, and we've got to be able to track that.
But that's also visible through action. You know, that it plays as subtext. The character does that, so therefore we understand how the character works. Beautiful European film that I often use, The Lives of Others. It's a German film where a character believes that he is a good man, although he is trying to imprison people who want to flee the former Eastern Germany, right? So he thinks he's a good man. We think he's not a good man. He needs to change. He needs to change his perspective. And he does change his perspective. We see that through little actions, through actions. All right? Remember? Plot, character. We see the character change only through little actions. And then we understand, okay, that inner journey is underway, right? At the end of Act 2, there's a lowest point, and it seems like it's not working, right? And that's where the character needs to make an action where we see that now he's fully aware and he's going to change. And that then marks the end of Act 2.
So very often, Act 1 says, here's the problem, but they don't know how to solve that problem until they get to the end of Act 2.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And then that lowest point, we see a particular action by the character that shows that the character is willing to sacrifice themselves. That's really what it's about.
Again, it comes to the hero's journey. That's one of the defining things of hero's journey, that there's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
There's that going into the darkness of the soul, which is in Star Wars was Luke Skywalker going to the cave to meet Darth Vader when he was on the planet with Yoda, for example.
Yeah.
This kind of scene.
Yeah.
And
we even have it in light-hearted films, because it sounds all very dark. Well,
yes.
in comedies, in romantic comedies, the sacrifice is where the lover is willing to sacrifice everything they believed in, the big lie they set up, right? And they were afraid to tell the truth. Well, at the end of Act 2, they're going to tell the truth, and they're still going to lose the lover.
So it can be a literal sacrifice of life, potentially, a sacrifice of the way of life, the way you used to live your life,
correct,
or just giving up something, which might be a humorous thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way they do it.
Yeah, and then so that end of Act 2, in my thinking, is often defined by that inner journey, not by the outer journey, and that's more difficult than the first act. And then we've had the midpoint. We won't talk about that now, but I really believe that a strong midpoint is part of a good 3-act structure. A midpoint that has a reversal. All right, that's usually pretty much in the middle of Act 2. And page numbers, Sid Field works with page numbers. I don't. Blake Snyder does. I think
Blake Snyder saved the cat.
Yeah, saved the cat. Yeah. I think there's a great deal of flexibility, but you need to know what you're doing. Don't worry about the page numbers. Ultimately, in your first draft, the page numbers will be out, and they should be. If you start working towards particular page numbers, you're not thinking about your story.
Because one of those examples is if you have like a 90-minute film. Roughly speaking, the first act is 30 pages, 30 minutes.
A little bit shorter. Usually it's a quarter. It's like 25%.
25%.
Yeah.
Act 2 is longer, Act 3 is. But then there are films that break those rules.
Absolutely.
Like Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Close Encounters is a great example. One of my favorite films of all time. I was watching it the other day with my students, right? And I was analyzing it for the first time. I've seen it so many times, I never analyzed it. And I was like, where is this first act going to end?
Yeah.
And it doesn't end until halfway the movie. And then I asked my students at the end, said, did you enjoy that? They were not into it. I said, this is interesting. Here's a film that breaks radically with what we understand is basic screenwriting structure. And today's audience doesn't buy it. We bought it. Why was this? Because I think we were in that hype of the UFOs.
I think we're a more patient audience. We'll let the story unfold, and as long as visually it's interesting and working, you can have a 40-minute, 50-minute first act, which that film does.
That's right.
Every act's like roughly the same length, because there's Close Encounters. There's 3 kinds, and each of those acts is a different encounter.
That's right, yeah.
I did the same with my last film. Every act was basically 30 minutes long exactly, because there were 3 murders in each of these.
Yeah.
One question though, when you're dealing with something like Shakespeare, and there are plays that have 5 acts, how do you turn that into a film?
You don't. You don't. And I know there's very successful screenwriters who say, all you need to do is read Shakespeare and you'll be a great screenwriter. I think Shakespeare shows you character flaws really, really well. And if you read the plays, the tragedies, it'll help you set up strong antagonists. If you can build a strong antagonist, it'll help you to build a good protagonist. So Shakespeare is all about conflicted characters and play that out in a believable way. But I think screenwriting is still very different. And I don't think the 5-act structure, and I know Robert McKee says Raiders of the Lost Ark is 5 acts. I don't think it is. I have a really good friend who works in Hollywood, who's paid millions of dollars. He reads my breakdown of Raiders of the Lost Ark on the website. To just refresh his understanding of the 3-act structure.
Well, you could almost argue with a strong midpoint, that's kind of like 4 acts.
That's right.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
4 acts, not 5.
Yes.
It's like television. TV's 4 acts as well, not 5.
So 3 acts, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. Sometimes, depending on the length,
Yeah.
of the acts.
And depending on how much you get paid. If I get paid enough, I'll write another act for you.
Yes, if
It won't work,
if you're going to do Batman, Dark Knight, was that 4 acts or 5 acts? Because they extended that, but that's...
No, that's a good one. That's actually...
It kind of had a whole separate ending,
You're
didn't
absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I would argue that could be a good, strong 4-actor rather than a traditional 3-actor. Anyway, structure is an important thing, whether it's 3 or 4 acts or whatever it's going to be. Thank you very much, Karel.
My pleasure.
See you next time on the next instalment in our series on screenwriting with Karel Segers.